Hello, this is Sean B.W. Parker for the Culture and Justice Reform podcast, episode 8, I think. And this week we are sans Emma again. She's stuck on a road somewhere in Britain. She'll tell me about that next week. We're talking tonight to Mr. Peter Joyce, who's in New Zealand, down under for us, but in New Zealand if you're watching from there. Point that one out. He's an expert in false allegations and the world around it, and very well written on the subject, having written a book a few years ago called Dry Ice, which he'll to tell us all about. The Oxford academic Ros Burnett, who's a legend in this field, wrote a really good review of the book in which he quoted that a lamb had slipped into the alligator pond. A lamb had slipped into the alligator pond, which is a wonderful reference for lots of people who've gone through the experience of false allegations, wrongful convictions, and that world. So enough of my nonsense. Let's meet Peter, and have a chat about the scene down under and how it is in Britain and how they compare. Hi, Peter. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks. How are you?
Very well. Nice to have you here.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to talk about this. I appreciate it.
Marvelous, good stuff. So would you like to talk about the book and what happened behind it, and perhaps about kind of your own case and how that led sort of to the book?
Yes, well, it happened in 2015. Out of the blue, I was accused of historical rape of a woman, then a girl who was about 13, who would have been 13 at the time. And as I said, completely out of the blue. And what's, I suppose, tragicomic is that I haven't even met her. I knew who she was because she's the daughter of a friend of mine. So when the name was mentioned to me, I knew, and I said, "Well, you mean such and such a person?" And the detective said yes. And I said, "Well, I've never met her," and I hadn't. So she actually accused her father and a large number of his friends, including myself, of systematically and repeatedly raping her when she was a young teenager. So that's the background of the case. And it was, the police called it a very complex case, and it was complex in the sense that there are a lot of accused, because there's obviously the girl's father and so many of his friends, and they were hard to track down so many years after the alleged event. But in another sense, it was actually very simple, because if the police had investigated objectively, in other words, if they'd actually tried to find out the facts, it was actually very obviously fantasy. And some people said to me, "Well, you know, clearly the police aren't investigating very well in your case." And I said, "Well, that's not strictly speaking correct. It's not that they're investigating badly, it's that they're not investigating at all." And 7 years later, I still say the same. It wasn't an investigation, it was case building. And the only thing that was complex was trying to make the allegations fit the facts. That was rather difficult because they simply didn't fit. So to cut a long story short, it took 7 months for us to be cleared. And finally, we were cleared in a very peremptory way. When I said to the investigating officer, "Well, is any chance that the accuser is going to be prosecuted?" And she just really laughed in my face, because that's not the kind of thing that happens. So we were cleared, but there was no follow-up for the accuser at all, as I said. And the other interesting thing about it is that if you go into a local police station and ask if they have any examples of false sexual allegations, their answer will be no, they don't. Because although I said we've been cleared, in fact, the case is kept open as a valid historical sexual allegation that doesn't yet have the evidence to proceed. And you see, this has an effect on the statistics of false allegations and how those statistics are interpreted. But I may have more to say about that later, depending on where we go. But that's the basic background there.
That's fascinating. Thank you for being so descriptive of the whole thing. The whole of the community that understand the false allegations, and the fact that after the Heard Depp story, which I know you're not particularly on, but we are, is that after that, the tide appears to have changed in terms of false allegations. People are getting sent to prison in England for making them, and there's also the backlash towards that going on. In the review that I saw of your book from Ros, she asked kind of asked the question in there: what was the motivation, do you think, of the accuser? What do you think the motivation was? Do you want to go into that at all?
That's a really interesting question, and there are so many times that my wife and I have thought what went through her head, and the short answer is we don't really know, and it may be a combination of things. And if we could speak to the accuser right now, it may be that even she doesn't know. In the book, if you read the book, you will see that I kind of alternate between thinking she was after compensation, and there's little doubt that she would have got money, even though it didn't go to court. That's not required. Here in New Zealand, you can certainly get a payout for sexual abuse without the case even going to court. There are really no questions asked about that. She did have a history of minor mental illness, and there was also the issue of her parents' marriage having split up all those years ago, so there may have been an aspect of spite there. But I'm afraid the short answer is I don't know, and I don't think anybody else does, including her.
Oh, indeed. There's an impression, isn't there, and we've discussed a little, by the fact that down in New Zealand, obviously I say down ridiculously, you down there come from things that have happened in Britain, and we know for a fact in Britain things tend to come over from New York, perhaps with some ideas from California, but the action in America. Is this conspiracy theory of me and of various other thinkers, but does it go from America to Britain to Australia to New Zealand like that, these weird patterns of counterintuitive law?
That's another very interesting question. I think it's not only conspiracy theories that go in that way, but almost everything, even fashions, many things follow that progression. And certainly that there are parallels there. I mean, that satanic panic back in the 1980s and 90s that led to, I think it was the McMartin case in America. And you had cases in the UK as well of alleged sexual abuse in schools, preschools and care homes and so on. When I say alleged sexual abuse, I mean, sometimes it did happen, but there was a kind of a panic about it and it got very exaggerated. And that came here as well. So yes, sometimes, yes, it did. There's a very famous case called the Christchurch Civic Crash case, which would be a subject for a whole separate interview. So all I'll do is mention it by name now, so anyone who wants to look it up can do so. Yes, that was huge and very divisive down here. So some of these things do follow a certain international path, you might say. But of course, there are differences in the countries, and the differences are often contained in different laws. Now, we in New Zealand have similar laws to what you have in the UK, so the pattern here has turned out in a very similar way. But you mentioned a moment ago that in the UK, the tide is turning somewhat, and it is possible for a provably false accuser to do jail time. There are some fairly high-profile cases in the UK of that. I don't think that's ever happened in New Zealand. I don't think any false accuser has ever done jail time in New Zealand, but I admit I'm not an expert. It may be the case, but it's information that's hard to get hold of. But I suspect the answer is they probably haven't. So we colonials, yeah, we may follow the same path, but it takes a while for things to filter down here.
Colonials. It's kind of interesting that these people have been starting to be put in prison in the way that lots of men have been put in prison under similar circumstances. But there's something in me and a lot of others who are trying to analyze what's going on, which says that they are not the ones who should be going to prison. I often get attacked kind of online about saying this. It's the system that's wrong. It's not actually the accusers. I mean, the accusers are wrong, but they're not as wrong as the system that facilitates them. Do you think I'm just being a stupid old hippie with this, or am I on the right lines?
I would never make such an accusation. No, no, I think that's right, because it's true that many of the false accusers, perhaps even most of them, do have mental issues. So perhaps there's a limit to how much we can blame them, some of them. But of course, like sexual crime itself, false accusations are of different kinds and every case is different. But yes, I think you're right, though, that it is mainly the system. The system really needs to be changed. And in particular, I mentioned before about the lack of true investigation. It's really just case building. And there's another development that I've heard of here from defense lawyers in particular in New Zealand, maybe the same in the UK, that increasingly, when a sexual accusation is made, charging is virtually automatic now. Now, what happened to me 7 years ago, as I said, it eventually led to our being cleared, or at least the case being filed until better evidence came up. But I've been told that if that were to happen now, it'd be worse for me because I'd probably be charged automatically. And that is a really, really sinister development, because you could say, oh, well, it's only charging. You know, it's still got to go to court, and it could be that a jury throws it out if there's no evidence. But even going to court is a tragedy for the accused.
Yeah.
I mean, what happens? The jury retires for 10 minutes, comes back with an acquittal, virtually laughing at the idea that this case was taken to court. What kind of nonsense is this? There was virtually no evidence. And the judge says, congratulations, you're free to go, but you've been hauled through the mill. You might have lost your job. You might have lost friends. You've lost your reputation, and you've probably lost $100,000 that you're not going to get back either. So this automatic charging, and all it means is that police don't have to investigate, right? She makes an accusation, you get charged. Now, I may have simplified that. I'm not a lawyer, and it might be that someone who knew more about the law would say to me, well, there is this aspect and the other aspect, but that's as I understand it as a layman.
Wow. There's this thinking coming over from America again, particularly from the documentary maker Claire Best, C-L-A-I-R-E, Claire Best, who's a documentary maker and a journalist who writes a lot about false accusations and everything around it. And she has been forensic in study of the Me Too movement and the Title IX thing in America. But basically, over the last 10 years, they've industrialized what became the Me Too movement, starting with the campus sex allegations. After seeing things like you were talking about in the children's homes, I suppose, from 20 years ago, go pretty much this century, coming up to now, and everyone going, what on earth is going on? Automatic charging, believe the victims. The believe the victims thing is an outrage to justice. And people will sort of say that about you and I. Of course, they'll say that. But the fact is, the lawyers are saying that to each other, and doing the grandstanding on Twitter and all the rest of it. It's maddening when you've gone through it. It's maddening for the mothers of the accused. I'll get off my soapbox in a minute. But what do you think about the fact that it's been industrialized? What are the statistics around what I'm talking about here? Can you give us any more detail?
Well, yes, the word industrialization is a little bit loaded, but I think I know what you mean. I mean, in effect, you're talking about following the money, aren't you? Yeah. And I think there's some truth in that. There's little doubt that there's money to be made by the accusers, especially if, as I said before, they get a payout, even if the case doesn't come to court, for heaven's sake. But also the lawyers, and I've had defense lawyers here say to me, what one said, his actual expression was bread and butter. This kind of case is my bread and butter. So there's certainly money to be made there, and he wasn't even denying it. I don't know. I don't know what else to say about that, because it is a complex matter, and we mustn't forget that in the middle of this, there is the fact that sexual abuse happens, sexual crime happens, and plenty of perpetrators do get away with it. And so I understand the motive behind it. It's a difficult crime to prosecute because it almost always occurs in private. And so the feminists and the activists, I don't like the word feminist because it can mean so many things. And I promised myself I wouldn't use it, but it's too late now, it's gone. They will say, well, these perpetrators are getting away with it, and then we've got to get more prosecutions. But that's not how a justice system can work, unfortunately. We can't have this believe the victim mentality, which takes away the presumption of innocence. So there are no easy answers here, and that industrialization is a terrible thing. But I do understand the motivation behind it, the frustration that perpetrators have got away with it and continue to get away with it. And I don't know what the answer to that is, but putting innocent people in jail because of some political pressure to raise conviction numbers, that certainly isn't the answer.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And I'm not sure if I answered your question there. I may have gone a little off on a tangent.
No, that's fine. When it comes to this industrialization of the thing, because obviously we've been through it, but we're also able to analyze it, right? And that's quite valuable because there's a lot of kind of emotion out there in the community about this. It's emotional because sex gets to the heart of every story in literature, everything, and at the heart of what we are. So that's the reason that these things are so hot and so cared about. And they damage, of course, they damage the person abused or possibly raped or stuff like that, and the people that have been accused of it. And when they stretch out the criteria to everything, everything that is not quite perfect then becomes some sort of a sexual assault. Whenever it was 50 years ago, you're just talking a degree of madness, aren't you? And then when the press are behind it all, as a part of the industrialization, what I'm getting to is the article that you just kind of wrote not that long ago. It's the last one you did for the Blackstone's Drum, which is your website, fascinating website. We'll have a link to that to the podcast. The last one was semantic gymnastics, which is my subject. I love the language. I love looking at the language of what the media does. It irritates me like crazy, but it was great to read your stuff, which was how they're twisting English into interesting different forms through the law, aren't they? Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, if you look at the website there, I think you're right. It is the most recent one I wrote. It was a bit cynical. I had cynical definitions of some terms which you will learn new meanings of if you go through the false accusation mill. And for the most obvious one is victim. I mean, the term victim is used all the time to mean sexual accuser. When I got my police file back through the Freedom of Information Act, there's just talk of the victim all the way through it. And we, the suspects, we're not suspects, we're the perpetrators. I have to be fair, I think on one occasion we were referred to as suspects, but generally it's, but then it's perpetrators or offenders. And it's everywhere. I mean, it's not just in the police files, it's in the media, it's in common usage. So victim is an obvious one. Another definition I had there was acquit. And my cynical definition of acquit is to obstruct justice by finding a perpetrator innocent. You know, that's really the way acquit is seen, because acquittals are not seen as part of a legitimate legal system. The point is, we've got to lock up these damn perpetrators. And if you're acquitting them, you're just not locking enough up. Another one is where there's smoke, there's fire. And that's why the title of my book was Dry Ice, because dry ice appears to be fire, but it's not really, it's fake. So the idea, yeah, okay, a lot of people have asked me about that. Yeah, so for example, a jury might say, I don't know what a jury says behind closed doors, but I imagine very often they'll say, well, did he do it or didn't he? Well, you know, where there's smoke, there's fire. We wouldn't have this accusation unless something was happening there. Jekyll and Hyde. If you're in front of a jury, or perhaps even a judge at sentencing, this might be more appropriate. If you're kind of a rough guy with a dodgy background, you've been to jail, then it's likely you're guilty. This is the way a jury or judge might see it. But if you're a respectable guy, then you also look guilty because you're a Jekyll and Hyde. You see, you're only respectable on the outside. So it's one of those situations where you're damned if you do and damned if you don't, or damned if you are and damned if you aren't. If you look like a criminal, then you're a sex offender. If you don't look like a criminal, then you're a sex offender. So this is just a couple of the definitions there under semantic gymnastics. But I've got about maybe 20 or 30 terms there.
I read them, they're hilarious, and they're very, very, in the most dark possible way, they're hilarious.
Yeah, it is fairly dark, but if you've been through this mill, you'll recognize at least some of those and the way they're used. Oh, another one there, and we've touched on this before, is investigate. The definition of investigate there isn't to find out the facts, it's the same as to build a case.
Yeah.
So you, and I hear this again and again and again from people who are falsely accused, that there was evidence out there to be found, and the police just weren't interested in it unless it was building the case, that they really just ignored it, that they didn't pursue it, or they sat on it and didn't reveal it, or it was lost in a cabinet somewhere. They're just not interested in things that will disprove what the accuser has to say. And I think this is pretty international.
That's the same kind of in down under, is it, as here? Because
yes,
there's a suspicion that that's a specially British thing, but that's not the case. That
no, you can't claim to be unique in this one, I'm afraid. Well,
no.
Also we're pretty good at it. We're pretty good at that down under as well.
Absolutely. There's an interesting thing that's happened again, sort of since the end of the Depp Heard case. Just to kind of cane this one a little bit more, in that guys generally, men, like what used to be called men, people with penises, tend to not talk about any of this anymore out there. They're a bit quiet, they're in the background, they try and get on with their own lives, doing other things. It's common, this. And if they do, they have a screen or something, different name online. The angst is coming from women. It's the fourth wave feminists, whether they're pro and anti. So you have the fourth wave feminists who are behind DEP, and then the fourth wave who are behind Amber, which is more traditional. And then you've got the barristers like Mr. Charlotte Proudman. She's not a Mr. That's my stammer. Charlotte Proudman, who's I don't know if you know her, but she's just a firebrand, and she's behind Amber basically, and the rest of everybody going, well, DEP won. I mean, what's your problem? And I think the problem is that they're interfering with the industry, and how dare you interfere with the industry and victim blame. All you women are now victim blaming. That is, all you women are now victim blaming, which is a pretty crazy situation. Am I wrong to be confused by this? Do you know what I mean?
Yes, well, yeah, victim blaming in itself is an interesting expression in this field, because you'll be called a victim blamer if you even call the accusation into doubt, and that's a whole new area. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure that I feel qualified to say very much about the DEP Heard case, or even the broader aspects of the background of it. I think I might be getting out of my field there and saying things I might regret later.
It's okay here, man. I mean, just go for it.
Well, my hesitation isn't so much that I'm concerned about upsetting anybody. It's just that I don't consider I know enough about it. And here I'm not speaking just specifically of the Heard DEP case, but even the background, the atmosphere around it is a little out of my territory. So you may well be right, but in short, I can't claim to know.
No, fair enough, of course. What's the situation at the moment with this kind of thing? Kind of according to the research that you do, which is very in depth. What's the situation right now these days?
Okay, so you're talking about the acceptance of the idea of false allegations.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Well. Okay. You said my research has been in depth, and in a sense it has. That is, I've gone in as deeply as I can, but there hasn't been really much research in this field. Certainly not much that can be trusted, because the short answer is that nobody knows how common false allegations are. What we do know is that the assumption in the media, in the public at large, and particularly among feminist or activist groups, the assumption is that false allegations are extremely rare. Well, how long is a piece of string? All I can say is that they are far more common than it's generally held to be, and especially among the activists. And one way of getting to the truth about this is to talk to retired police officers who used to work in this field. And I say retired because if they're still working, then you may not get a straight answer out of them, because there's a certain narrative they have to follow. But I've spoken to some retired police officers from this field who say that false allegations are far more common than generally held. But of course, nothing happens to the accusers. Now, I spoke to an American guy from Virginia. He worked in this field, and he said, yes, they are very common. He started to write a book about it, but then he gave up because he just wanted to put it behind him. It got too depressing. And he said the particular problem in America is that the DAs, the district attorneys who are in charge of prosecutions, I believe in 47 of the 50 states, they're elected, not appointed. And so because they're elected, they don't want to give the impression that they're going after vulnerable women, chasing them through the courts. So whenever he made a suggestion for someone to be prosecuted for making a false allegation, the answer came back, no, we're not going to prosecute.
Mm.
Now, there are two studies I want to mention briefly. One was in the 1980s, and it was in America by a guy called Eugene Kanin, Kanin. And he found that false allegations are probably about a third. Now, there's been some criticism of the study that the methodology wasn't sound and so on, and there may be some validity to that. But what's interesting is that two German researchers, that's Wiebke Steffen and Erich Elsner in Bavaria in the year 2000, they did a study of all rape allegations made in Bavaria in that year. And I think there was something like 1,700 of them. And they found that the investigators, the detectives, believed that about a third of them were false. Now, it's interesting that that was the same as the American study, which is a very, very different longitudinal study. So probably about a third were false. When further investigation was done, 8% of the rape allegations, the accusers actually admitted that they'd made it up. So what we've got here is a known and an unknown. So the known figure is 8%. But as I said, the investigators thought that the true number of false allegations was about the third. And the most interesting thing about that study was that the female detectives put the number higher than the male detectives did.
Mm.
So there's not much sign of any patriarchy at work there.
No, there really isn't in the whole story.
No. So yeah, those are the two most thorough studies I know of, but I'm sure that even the people who conducted those studies would say, we can't know for sure. But the way, I'm particularly interested in the statistics, and it's more about what we don't know than what we do or can know. Mm-hmm. And there was a UK study done by the Crown Prosecution Service that the activists like to quote, and they give it as evidence that false allegations are very rare. And the Crown Prosecution Service, I think this actually came through the Home Office, so I don't know which organisation was responsible. They said that it was something like 2% of sexual accusations are false. But this was based on the number of prosecutions for false accusations. Mm. So it is a nonsense figure, absolute nonsense.
Yeah.
And you cannot say that the frequency of the occurrence of any crime can be measured by the number of people prosecuted for that crime. And especially since the authorities, the police districts, they won't prosecute most false accusers out of public interest.
I know. We're going to have to come back to this, Peter, because we're about to run out of time, I'm afraid. But if you're up for a part 2, we'd love to do one in a couple of weeks. We'll talk about statistics,
Yeah, okay. Sorry, that's a whole new,
I know. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And we're going to link to your book as well. So we'll see you next time, everyone. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much, Sean. I'll talk to you then. Bye.